Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of 100 Ways to Make 100K. And I got someone I want to introduce you to. He goes by the name of Kurt Royce, and he founded a business called the EB5 Marketplace. But as we go into this episode, we're not going to get straight into that. We're going to dive into the nuances of the journey that brought him there. From telecom, from stock options, to Colorado, maybe a ski resort, and now up to a little bit of the trouble that he's getting into. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot wait to introduce you to Kurt Royce.
Hi, Joanne.
Hey, Kurt, thanks so much for being here. It's an honor to have you on the show, and I'm really excited. I know I've gotten glimpses of your story, but I can't wait to share with the audience. So maybe before we even dive too in depth with what it is that you're doing right now, maybe you could share a couple of the major chapters throughout your life that turned Kurt into the Kurt that he is today.
Well, my career started right out of college. I went to a co-op school in Northeastern in Boston University. I'll restate that. So when I graduated from Northeastern University as a co-op school, I took a job trading options on the floor of the American Stock Exchange. And that was a great opportunity for a young person, trading a lot of money and being able to see your account fluctuate tremendously. It became a game, when numbers are big like that and you're young, it's just a matter of how big can you make the numbers, not really that it's real and doesn't really affect your life. So I'm living in the same small apartment and taking the ferry to work every day. But eventually when you start spending that money, then you start to realize the power of having made it.
Interesting. So what was the first thing that you...
A car.
Yeah. What'd you buy?
I bought a Subaru, actually.
That's cool, man. And this was, so you graduated in Boston, but then you ended up in New York. Mm-hmm. Like, how did you end up getting to New York? Well, you probably drove or took a bus or something, but like, how did you get that opportunity?
Yeah, I had the opportunity from a family member.
Okay.
My uncle was willing to put the money up to back me.
Wow.
And he was a brilliant mathematician.
Okay.
One of the best bridge players in the world at the time. And he saw an opportunity for me to come down and trade options under a program that he and some friends had developed.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So how did something like that work when you said he backed you and like they started a program for you? What does that mean? Like they started a fund and said, Kurt, manage this?
No, it's not managing. What you're doing is you're trading, you're basically scalping. So someone comes in and wants to buy an option in DuPont, let's say, and the option price is 3.25, 3.5. Mm-hmm. So, you buy them at 3.25, you sell them at 3.5. The market moves, the stock moves. You've got to adjust your pricing. There was a model called Black-Scholes that had come out recently that evaluated what options were actually worth. So we had a printout. We could kind of keep track of the changing values, and you had to kind of judge how the market was running in direction wise, but it wasn't really very difficult. I enjoyed math. And so, the probability game was fun. Yeah. And as a young person, the biggest problem is you don't really know, you don't have a lot of experience on things going wrong. When things are going right, it's pretty easy to make money in a scenario like that. But when things start to go a little bit off kilter, volatility changes and you don't notice it, or something starts to run and you're still trading on probability, it can cause a lot of problems. So I learned that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was.
Interesting. Probably a humbling experience. Mm-hmm. Now, what was options trading like back then? Because now you look at your phone, you see this app and it's just a bunch of numbers on a screen, puts, calls, and you make your trades accordingly. Mm-hmm. But back then,
well, now it's just pennies difference. So you can buy an option for $3.02 and sell it for $3.01, or exactly. I mean, like there's such a small spread that to be a trader these days is you have to have a different ability than I had. I was just able to see as movements, I could calculate, I could extrapolate what a value might be. So it wasn't very difficult.
Now, what was the medium back then? Because we watch movies and it's a bunch of people in a room throwing up papers all over the place, right? Like now it's on our phones. Like what did it?
Yeah, back then you had a pad. You'd write down the number of the trader. And so you had a deal and everybody's word was their bond.
Wow.
And so, you could get into a situation where you made a trade and it could wipe you out.
Wow.
But you had to honor it And that's just the way the game was. You write down you take the company's name. So Bear Stearns 302 is the name of the trader. I sold you this for this price, and that was it. I put it in my pocket, and then
off you went, eh?
Yeah, and then that night, the clerks would match them all up and make sure that everybody's trades were properly.
Wow, it's interesting when you just look at how technology has changed an industry like that. You know, because when I got introduced to it, it was on my phone. So when I hear these stories about options being traded back in the day, and it's like, yeah, you have this paper that you put in your pocket. Like, I can't even wrap my head around that. That's super cool. Yeah. So now, was this the first time that you made $100 grand in a year?
Yeah, first time I made $100 grand a day, actually.
Yeah.
Well, because the options, like they can move really aggressively. So, but you expect that the next day you're going to see a significant decrease. But the movement is so erratic that it's hard to get too serious about anything.
Interesting. It's interesting to think like what something like that could do to your mind, especially when you start playing with your own funds after that. So, so what happened closer to the end of this options trading run? Where did you go? What types of opportunities?
It went through the crash of '87.
Okay.
And actually, I happened to be in a position where I took advantage of that. That was very good for me. But after that, a lot of my friends had gone out bust because they were on the wrong side of the market at that point. And I didn't really enjoy it after a couple of years because you're staring at screens, waiting for someone to come in and want to trade. And so it's, for smart people, it's a nice way to make money, but probably wasn't. I realized pretty quickly that it was something I wanted to move on from. At the time, I had made an investment in cellular. So cellular was a brand new concept, and the idea was you could buy spectrum, a cellular spectrum, and there was 420 different territories around the country, actually rural territories around the country that the government was giving away. You just had to apply for them and then enter a lottery. And so I entered into 420 different lotteries.
So that's almost like the cannabis lottery that they had recently in Ontario, kind of similar, would you say?
Well, it's a lottery. I don't know anything about the cannabis lottery.
Oh, so you ended up getting a license to open up a store.
Okay. Yeah. There were 2 licenses in each territory.
Okay.
One was given to the Bell incumbent, and one was given to anyone who could come up with engineering drawings that would identify where you would build towers. And so if you could put that package together, you could submit it and enter into the lottery. So more complicated, maybe. I don't know. Maybe the cannabis lottery requires you to have a business plan. I don't know.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I definitely didn't enter the lottery. I mean, I'm still here playing around with cameras and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more. How did this lottery unfold? There's 420 different ones.
Right.
Did you have to come up with 420 different drawings? And
yes.
Were you making these drawings by hand?
Okay. There was a company that actually was putting these engineering drawings together.
Oh, okay.
So I hired them, and that's how I entered all the lotteries.
420 drawings, though. That must have been quite pricey at the time.
Yeah, it was. It cost me $75,000,
okay,
and then I had a couple of partners involved. So we probably, it was probably a total of $200,000 altogether.
Wow. Okay. So now you put together this application, you apply to be part of this lottery, 420 of them, and then what happens?
Well, then I won one.
Okay.
My partnership won one.
Yeah.
And it was a very valuable one. And after thinking about it, I decided to quit the trading and move to Colorado from New York. And we started testing sites.
Wow.
And so I started erecting towers and then driving our vehicles along and using equipment to see how good the signal was.
Wow. Okay. So hold on. So you all of a sudden go from trading options in New York, downtown New York, to all of a sudden being in rural Colorado, driving around a truck and testing out cellular towers.
Yeah. Now Vail, Colorado. Yeah.
So how all of a sudden did you just get into this world? Like, were you doing like researching? Were you researching
One
a lot?
of the partners I had was actually the guy who sold me the application, the engineering drawings. He's a salesman for that company.
Okay.
And so he said, listen, I want to join one of these partnerships. Can I join yours? And, when we were applying, sure, I'd love to have somebody on the inside knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so when we won, he was really geared up and had a good idea of how to go about this.
Wow. It's interesting that he's like the expert, the technical expert, at least in that realm. And you're kind of like the numbers guy, the vision guy behind this thing. So what was the whole vision behind this cellular? Because it's 1987, you get the lottery, they send you to Vail, or you send yourself to Vail.
Yeah. I think what it was is there was a story I read about a person sitting under a tree, working on their computer and having a phone next to them. And of course, it wasn't too long and the phones were this big, right? But the idea that if you could communicate through the air as opposed to having plugged in everywhere, it seemed like a logical thing to me. And so I was pretty sure that the spectrum would be valuable. Just didn't really, I didn't think it would get to where it's gotten. But it seemed to me like it was a worthwhile opportunity, a worthwhile bet.
Interesting. Well,
I actually looked at it as an extension of what I was already doing, which was guessing as to like where things were likely headed.
Okay. And it's interesting to see like that you're actually going to do something about that bet. Because a lot of people will be like, yeah, this is where the world's going, and then sit back down and do nothing about it.
Well, I remember 2 weeks before we got our lottery picked, it had been submitted like 8-9 months earlier. And me and a buddy who had both invested, he a lot less than me, but we had both invested a significant amount of money. And we looked at each other like, what the fuck were we thinking?
Yeah.
That was dumb.
I mean, dude, of course.
Right.
Like,
So, at moments like that, right, you're like, how could I have been taken in to think that this was a good idea? And then, of course, you get picked and you're like, oh, well, brilliant.
Yeah, it worked out. And I can only imagine how many people put together an application and it didn't work out. It sucks for them.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that? So now you have this vision of someone with a cell phone beside them, big cell phone, and a computer underneath a tree. And now you've got this rural territory and now you got to bring it to life. Like it's very different than trading.
Yeah. Something, what happened was, as we started testing these sites, we started getting offers to get bought out
Right away.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we eventually decided to sell. And then I retired. And at 29, 30 years old, I'm playing golf every day.
Okay.
And drinking and playing cards at night and living the dream. But that dream kind of wears on you pretty quickly,
Wow.
And so after about, I'd say 2.5 years of that, I'd had enough of that.
Really?
And
it's interesting because that's the vision that everybody paints. That's the vision that everybody sold. Like there's this thing called the retirement and you go and you play golf every day, right? But you got a taste of that and said, yeah, I don't know if I want this meal very much longer.
I'm 61 years old now and working as hard as I've ever worked.
Dude, you look great for 61, man.
And, I realized that I probably enjoy myself more than my dad who couldn't wait to retire.
Wow.
So I feel like I've already lived that retirement and I'll work the rest of my life. I'll work at the pace I want to, but I do enjoy doing what I do.
And how tough was it to come to that realization? Because when you're sold something, right, and you taste it, you want to keep telling yourself like, yeah, this is it. This is what's supposed to happen. What was that kind of like realization moment when you started realizing that you wanted to go back to work, when you wanted to start doing stuff?
I don't know what the moment was. I think someone introduced an opportunity to me.
Okay.
And it sounded like fun.
Okay.
We ended up opening up a hair salon at the Ritz-Carlton in Aspen, Colorado. He was a famous hairstylist in Denver, became a good friend of mine. Then we opened another one in Cancun. And, that really kind of started putting me around in different places in the world.
Okay.
Again, it was a lot of hard work, but it was exciting.
How do you meet a hairstylist and end up opening up a hair salon at the Ritz? Like, what a life, man. Yeah. So how did you find this hairstylist? How did you guys end up meeting?
Well, that was a strange thing. My wife was coming back with terrible haircuts at the time.
Okay.
And so I called up a modeling agency and I said, where do you send your models? And they said, well, we send them to Paul Garcia specifically, to Paul himself. Paul had a salon. Okay. And so I set up an appointment for her and then she looked great. And then after a couple of bad haircuts from me, I said, I think I'll just go and find out what I'm doing wrong. Okay. And then
so you got your haircut.
So I got my haircut. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. She was tired of your haircuts too.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you and Paul end up hitting off, and all of a sudden you're like, Paul, I got this great idea. Let's open up a hair salon.
No, he got approached by the Ritz-Carlton because they were opening a hotel in Aspen, and they wanted to put a top-notch salon there.
Okay.
So he needed a backer.
Got it. So backing. The same sort of thing that your uncle did for you. Now you're in the position to do this for others.
Right.
Interesting. So now you go down this route of opening up one hair salon, opening up two. Did that venture keep going after that? Did you start pivoting and looking at some other things?
It stopped because Paul, being a gay person, Mexico was cracking down on gays at the time. Or at least he had this fear that it was dangerous for him.
Okay.
And it may have been appropriate. I can't tell. But he didn't want to go down anymore. And so I said, okay, let me stick with Mexico. You take over Aspen.
Okay.
And I enjoyed Mexico. I mean,
Yeah.
I love Mexico.
I could imagine.
Ended up meeting my future second wife, my future wife there.
In Mexico, eh? Now, how long were you down there for?
I'd go down for a few weeks at a time.
And if Paul wasn't going to be there opening the salon, were you now all of a sudden?
No, I had hired some people who knew what they were doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just like that, the operation was set up. And now where is Kurt's life taking him? Because like you're mid-30s, you're retired, you're living in Mexico, you got a hair salon here, a hair salon there. You just exited from a cellular, cellular company, ex-retired options trader. Like,
So now I buy a whole block of row houses in North Denver.
okay.
So 8 row houses similar to this house, built in the 1880s.
Okay.
And so I decided I wanted to redevelop this property.
Why? Just because like you're bored and you have it in your
Exactly.
Okay.
Looking for
got it.
something that I
Looking for something to do.
And not only that, but I've always been drawn to making a place gorgeous. You know, if there's any art capability, artist in me, it's in architecture.
Okay.
And so I saw this old building and it had been run down, and we gutted it and we cleaned it up. And I sold it early because the market hadn't really changed. Now, North Denver since then has become probably the hottest place in Denver.
Wow.
But at the time it was, again, very Mexican and run down. And so we were too early to really benefit from the transition. But now that same building is probably worth a lot more.
Wow.
But by then I'd moved to Canada.
Okay.
My new wife, it was time to leave, also because you find it when you get a divorce, friends start they start taking sides.
Okay.
And I do not like drama. And so I decided it was time for me to pick up and move. And my wife, who was from Canada now, she wanted to be close to mom.
Okay.
And so we moved to Toronto.
Interesting. And just like that, you're in Toronto. Now, I remember you telling me something about a ski hill.
So we also had bought a piece of property in Colorado, about 35 acres, that was near a ski resort. And we also bought a small hotel in the market. It was one of the most beautiful places.
Now, was this around the same time as the row houses? Was this when the row houses were done, in progress? What?
No, actually, there's a whole portion of my life where when I was done with the row houses, I realized how difficult it was to identify good contractors. They would come in with 3 references at the time, 3 letters of reference. And I think one could be from their cousin. Who the hell knew they were coming from?
Yeah.
And so when I discovered that some tradesmen were great and some were awful, and the awful ones would not only slow you down, but if they didn't show up, then your progression of all these other tradesmen would go, the schedule would go off.
Yeah.
And so when we were done with that project, someone introduced the internet to me. And I thought, if homeowners were able to write their reviews online, that would change this whole industry, because right now we're relying on these contractors to come to us with 3 references.
Yeah.
And so we started a company called contractors.com.
Interesting.
And we ran that for about 12 years.
Wow.
And it was a very interesting opportunity, and we really could have been very successful. But I made some mistakes. And the biggest mistake I made was, instead of focusing on Colorado or Denver contractors and really bringing them the kind of business that I could bring from a marketing effort, because I got this name Contractors, I thought I needed to go national.
Okay.
And now my marketing was very thin. It didn't give contractors enough. It was nice for getting a couple leads from me, but they wanted every lead to come from this internet capability. And they wanted to basically abandon their old marketing.
Okay.
And so people who were able to do it in a big way were more successful. And we really I think we had the better model, but I think our execution was off.
Interesting. So, and you think the biggest flaw in the execution that you guys were planning was that you tried to go too wide too quickly?
Yeah, too wide too quickly.
Interesting. If you were to do it again, how do you think you would adjust
Well,
it?
Angie's List did something. I don't know if you ever heard of that,
Yep.
but she did one market, like I think Atlanta or something.
Okay.
And had enough leads to really draw the contractors in and change the way they did their business.
Wow.
And then she moved to another market.
Okay. So one market at a time.
Yeah.
That's good to know, man. I appreciate you sharing that. So, okay. So now you meet the new wife. Oh, wait, no. Hold on. We got to put a cap on what happened with the ski resort. So there was 35 acres, a hotel involved with it. So
well, that's, okay, we're skipping a bit. So when this contractors.com, when that finally runs its course and I sell it out to a California firm, we buy a small hotel in Colorado. At this point, I've been working on the internet for 10 years. I wanted to meet people again. I wanted to get out there. And we had owned this 40 acres that was a beautiful spot. There was a hotel for sale. And we decided, let's buy this hotel. And they're starting up a ski resort. There's a ski resort in the area. It had shuttered about 3 years earlier. And somebody had bought it and was going to bring it back to life. And I thought this hotel would benefit not only from the summer tourists, but soon it would benefit from the winter tourists. So, but unfortunately, that guy started running out of money and he needed to raise more capital. And the banks in the small market like that, they couldn't take a chance on a ski resort because if the ski resort should fail, the bank would probably fail.
Yeah.
So I looked into how I could help them raise money. And that took me into the EB5 industry because there was a project in Vermont called J-Peak that was raising a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars for their ski resort. And they were creating lots of jobs because it's a job creation program. You get your green card by making an investment in a business that creates jobs. Seemed like a perfect fit for the Colorado project.
J-Peak was the first international mountain that I snowboarded at. So it's
Is that
cool.
right?
Yeah. It's really cool that you say that. Okay. So now you catch wind of this program that's happening at J-Peak and you think this might be something that you could do in the Colorado project.
Right.
Okay. But
by the time, it takes a while to put these things together and they're expensive to put the offering package together. You've got to have experts in the industry. You've got to have an economist, a business plan writer, a securities attorney, an immigration attorney. So you've got a lot of people that you got to bring together. And there's a lot of figuring things out. There's a lot of expenditures. And by the time we had gotten to the point where we had a package to go out and present to investors around the world, the guy who was running the ski resort ran out of money and taxes started, he started losing lots in tax foreclosures. And that really put an end to that project.
Interesting. So, but now you just went through this whole process of putting together an EB5 proposal.
Right.
You've gathered the economists, you've gathered the business plan people, and you're still kind of like, where do I go next?
Well, now I'm really seeing EB5 as something I want to do. I'm really intrigued by it. It's got everything I want. It's got international exposure, so you have an opportunity to meet people all over the world. And there's a great deal of money involved in it. At the time, it was a $500,000 investment. Now it's an $800,000 investment. And so my wife and I looked at this. Now, she's a CPA. She had been a business auditor at Revenue Canada. And she'd also been the CFO of both the contracting company that I got involved in and the .com and the contractors.com, and also ran the hotel books. So she had a lot of exposure to hotels, which is very popular in EB5. And she'd also seen a lot of business audits. So I asked her, would you be interested in doing due diligence on projects so I know what to sell? And so I got my license. I got registered with a broker dealer and I'm an investment banker, and she's doing these due diligence reports. And almost immediately, the president of the EB5 association, it's called IIUSA, contact her and I saying, we desperately need due diligence in this industry. There's a lot of shady things happening and no one really knows how to evaluate these things. We'd like to bring you into the fold. And so he became a real advocate of what we were doing. And that was in 2012. And so for the next 10 years, we did due diligence on projects and I sold the ones that I thought were the best in the market.
Interesting. So now, before you even, because like there was a bunch of years that were kind of like not necessarily defining in depth right now, but I really appreciate you sharing the story on how you and your wife met. Well, I'm guessing you guys met through kind of like working.
No, she was on vacation and I was in a cafe. And
oh, okay.
yeah.
And okay. Now, what's interesting about that is that she was already involved in a bunch of the projects that you were doing.
No. She was working at Revenue Canada at the time.
Oh.
So after we had met, but and liked each other, but I had just been I was going through a divorce.
Yeah.
So when the divorce finalized, then we kind of reconnected, and
Okay.
that's how we got together.
Interesting. So there's all these things happening, but now you're more interested in this EB5. She's kind of interested. There's the organization now catching wind of what it is that you two have created. Now, how do you go from not being known in this EB5 industry to all of a sudden being known?
Well, I had this idea,
Okay, tell me.
doing podcasts.
Okay.
So I was just going to call people up and meet them
Okay.
and learn from listening to what they were saying. So for 2 years, what I did was I wanted to introduce securities rules to this immigration program.
Okay.
And that's really where it lacked. The immigration program didn't understand that because they're involved in investments, they need to actually be scrutinized the way the SEC scrutinizes investments. But they thought, no, it's an immigration program. It doesn't involve securities at all, but it does. And so people were just coming to realize that as I got in. And so what I started doing is hosting podcasts like this. And every 2 weeks, I would interview somebody and they would tell me their story. Now I have a pre-meeting with them as well. So I would garner like, okay, what are we talking about? And learning. So when I got on the podcast, I looked like I knew what I was talking about because I'd prepped with the guest and I would ask questions. And so between that, then I would take the podcast and I would turn it into an article, maybe multiple articles. So I had this distribution of articles going out. I had podcasts going out. And over the next 2 years, not only did I make a ton of friends in the industry, but I became really recognizable.
Interesting. Now, where you're putting out these articles, is it just on your own website? Are you distributing them? Are you doing like PR type of moves where you're sending them to other outlets? Like,
we basically built it pretty organically. I think people started sharing it and our database built relatively quickly, actually.
Wow. Interesting. And when you say the database built, was this just people who were guests or people subscribing to kind of learn what it is?
Yeah, people were sharing our articles and podcasts and the industry got wind of it.
Okay.
And, who knows like how much the president of the association was sending it out. Hey, maybe you should watch this. So I don't really know what was happening out there. In fact, the first time I showed up at an event, probably a year after I began the podcasts, people all recognized me. And it was like, oh my goodness, something's happening. Something's happening here. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you don't know when you're sitting in your room, and doing these things.
And it's interesting too, because you have this vision of a guy sitting under a tree with a laptop and a phone, right? And ideally, well, I mean, this one's a little bit more of an elaborate setup, but that's ideally what most podcasts are in today's environment is people just with a laptop and a phone making something happen. So now what were some of the bigger surprises that have played out as a result of this podcast? When did you start it, by the way?
Started around 2014, 2015.
Okay. So this is super early, I mean, for most podcasts. And now, when do you still do it to this day?
No, we're going to restart shortly.
Okay.
But no, I haven't done it in a while.
And what made you stop? Capacity?
I don't know. I don't know what caused me to stop.
Interesting. What was kind of like some of the interesting things that have played out or opportunities or people that you met as a result of having
one of the things I've done is during that time, I identified the top securities attorneys in the industry, invited them to participate on a weekly roundtable call. And so to this day, for the last 7 or 8 years, we have been on every week. A group of securities attorneys join a call and they share what's going on and they ask questions of each other. Have you run into this? How do you handle this? And so to this day, we're a very close group and very supportive of each other. And then about 3 years ago, I did the same thing with the immigration lawyers. I have a group of immigration lawyers who do the same thing. They share, because in the immigration service, it's a very closed environment. They don't share what's going on publicly. In fact, a lot of decisions have to be made based on applications that are filed. but the government doesn't tell you how many are being filed. They only tell you when somebody gets approved. And since it can take a year, 2, 3 years to approve somebody, the information is it's just non-existent.
Yeah.
So sharing it amongst attorneys is really an important way to kind of gauge how things are evolving.
Interesting. It's interesting that you say that, and thank you for sharing. So that's kind of been like the last couple of years more recently since the podcast has been on pause. Now, how has EB5 Marketplace kind of grown from just an idea to where it is today?
Well, because the market has gone through so many transitions. So in 2020, the program shut down.
Wow.
The regional center program, which dominates the program, shut down. There was a direct investment program that was still alive, where you could make a direct investment into a project and actually count the bodies that you hired to get to 10. And so we moved to that model for a year and a half.
During the shutdown.
During that shutdown.
Because that must have been scary, man. Imagine like your whole business is based around this like government program. All of a sudden the government says program's not here anymore.
You know, I was in a really good position at that time because I was the only one who could really transition into helping small businesses raise capital through the EB5 program. Everyone else was kind of more tied to the regional center program. So we were able to pivot. And then in 2022, in March 2022, they relaunched the regional center program, which, now we had to pivot back to the regional center program. And they also required everyone to follow securities laws because there was so much fraud being committed prior to the shutdown. That's why they shut it down to a large extent, because they couldn't get a handle on it. All these players were not following securities rules because they were kind of claiming an issuer exemption, meaning it's my offering. I'm allowed to sell my offering. I don't need a professional. I don't need to be regulated. Well, the government saw that as causing a lot of problems. And so when they relaunched the program, they said, you've got to be securities compliant. And so I'm really well suited for that because I've been regulated. I've been one of the few people who have been regulated since the beginning. So I knew what the program required. A lot of people really didn't. So I was able to transition back into the regional center program slowly, but I like our position in the market.
Yeah. So if you were to describe the position, what it is that you guys do now, who you guys help, I would love to hear a little bit more about what EB5 Marketplace actually does. Like our audience has no clue, right? Some of them are going to be Googling, but maybe we could hear it, directly from the founder. We'd love to.
Sure. So EB5 represents, you make an $800,000 investment into a project that has multiple investors. And the key is that project must create 10 jobs for each investor. That's an easy bar, actually, because they allow economic modeling, which means if you spend the money, if the company spends money, let's say $50 million is the amount they plan to spend. Well, an economist will say, well, based on $50 million expenditures, we can justify 500 jobs. Well, 500 jobs equates to potentially 50 investors. Now, if you want to make sure you have a cushion, and a 30% cushion's kind of a normality in this industry, 350 jobs mean 35 investors coming with $800,000 each. Real nice. And the investors will take a very low rate of return in exchange for getting their green card. And the green card is good for them, their wife, and their children under 21. So it's a really win-win situation.
And that's ideally how that EB5 program works.
That's how the EB5 program works today. Canada is a very popular destination. People want to work and live in the US. They don't want any restrictions. So making an investment in a project solves that. There's a lot of Indians and Chinese living in the US on an H-1B visa. They are tied to an employer. If the employer says, okay, we're letting you go, you can lose your visa. Or if you want to start your own business, you're tied to the company because their visa's tied to it. So this EB5 offers them an opportunity to make an investment of $800,000, get their money back, hopefully, in a few years, and get their green card and kind of start their life and not have the concerns.
So an interesting space that I've kind of like dabbled in, had a few friends start in, is marketplace apps. So marketplace is essentially, the place where different parties connect. So you've got this ecosystem around this EB5 that's probably like businesses that are looking for money, the regulators and the people who actually like apply and play the referee in this situation. And then you've got the investors. So business owners, referees, and investors, right? Like how do you think about that ecosystem and creating initiatives to bring all these people together. Maybe you could describe some of the things that you've put in place in your world to help this marketplace flourish without giving away too much.
Well, the truth is that we're in the midst of that.
Okay.
We're still trying to figure out exactly what's the best. So we do due diligence on all the projects that we have.
Yeah.
And so I'm already seeing that the investors they used to trust someone in China to make their decision for them. And now that so many of them got burned and lost their money, in some cases didn't even get their benefits of immigration,
Wow.
they've come to realize that due diligence is much more important than they kind of thought it was. So our business offers due diligence. It basically scrutinizes a deal. It looks at the background of all of the people involved. It confirms and verifies all the claims that are being made, and basically lays out the story. It lays out the argument of why this is a good investment. So we've only got 5 deals right now on our marketplace. We're still at that early growth point, but I would expect that will get significantly bigger over the next 12 months, where investors can come in, can learn about a deal on their own. They can compare these reports and then compare the projects, and then they can pick the one that's most suitable for them.
And in order to get on the marketplace, your deal has to be vetted by the due diligence process.
That's right.
So when you think about ecosystem for new deals, ecosystem for new investors, because like most of these investors are worldwide, right? Like is it just like trying to get high SEO rankings? Like how would you go about getting these people?
Yeah, there's a couple of strategies. One is SEO. One is cost per click advertising, Google AdWords. One is social media. And then the other one is just, traveling the world, attending events, hosting events, meeting people.
Kurt,
yeah,
it's tough, man. That's tough work.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's very hard, actually.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It wears you down.
Yeah.
But it's really critical to the process.
Yeah, 100%. So when it's cool when you think about it and you look at the arc of the journey that you've been on, and it's like it started in options trading, where we analyze these different investments. Okay, let me get in the field and create my own investment. Oh wait, other people have their own investments but need investors. Okay, let's go right back to creating the investment, almost like from the options. It's like same shit, different toilet,
Well, certainly the contractors.com and what I'm doing now is almost the same business. I was basically allowing homeowners to write reviews about contractors. And now, well, I guess I'm writing reviews about these deals and trying to make them available. But, the truth is there's not that many big ideas in the world, right? Like, they seem like very disparate businesses, but it's essentially, doing your homework before you make a decision, and whether that's remodeling your house or investing in a business.
Yeah. Now, what would you say like your favorite part about some of the things that you have going on these days is?
I think that I have 3 kids that travel the world right now. One is in her first year in college in England. The other is right now in Vietnam with his mom.
Wow.
So she's on a tour meeting investors, and he's there for a mock UN event, but then he hooked up with her at Singapore. And the exposure that we have had in the world over the last 10 years, it's kind of opened up our kids' minds, without really, we don't talk a lot about it, but they're exposed to it. And exposing kids to broader concepts has probably been the most valuable thing I've ever done in my life, actually.
Really? And add a little bit more, texture to that. I would love to hear a little bit about why you think that's.
Well, the biggest problems in this world are coming from my experience right now. It's in the US, and it's the people who have never left their town. And they have fear, right? They have fear that there's a deep state. They have fear that people are making their life miserable. Wow. But as you travel the world, you start to realize everyone's got issues, and yours aren't necessarily bigger than anyone else's, but there's also a lot to learn by traveling the world. People solve problems differently in different places, and you can bring some of those ideas back. And so it makes you feel less alone as you travel, as you meet people. I was just reading that Asia has more unhappiness right now than any other part of the world.
Wow.
And that really surprised me, because it seems to me like a lot of these Asian countries would have, they may not be rich, but they've got a real quality of life. Actually, you're gonna have to cut that because
Okay.
I don't recall. Like, I might be confusing. I just read it yesterday that there's a happiness index, but I'm not sure if that's the same thing as I was referring to. So yeah, I'll have to come back to that.
That's okay. That's okay. So we were with your favorite parts about what you like now.
Right.
And then you're talking about traveling and being able to expose the kids to different ideals. The biggest problems are coming from people not leaving their hometown.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's
I think
where we
that's
landed.
the story. Yeah.
That's cool, man. So what type of people are you looking to come into your world these days?
Well, we're looking for people who, for example, I'm looking at hiring a guy who is from Peru.
Okay.
And he knows that market. He's got, comes from a family of successful people in the banking industry. And he's a guy who I think would really be a good fit for what we're doing, which is, looking after people that want to move to the US, giving them options that make sense, that have been properly vetted, and giving them a comfortable option to pursue that for themselves and for their family. So that I think for each country in the world or each region of the world, I'd like to have somebody. In fact, I think in India, we'll probably have 3 people. In Canada, we certainly would need one on each coast. So we're looking for people who can learn what we are doing and want to establish relationships with people that want to move to the U.S.
And this is only a U.S. destination type program.
Yeah.
Does Canada have something similar?
Canada had one that was very similar, and it led to EB5. Canada had a program in 2012, 2013, where you could make an investment of $700,000 or $800,000, and China just ate it up. There was 65,000 applicants willing to spend that much money to move to Canada, and the government got so overwhelmed. Had so much money coming in, they didn't know what to do with it.
Really?
So they shut the program down temporarily while they tried to figure it out. And then a year and a half later, under the Harper government, they just said, we're giving all the money back. They just didn't know what to do with it. Interesting. So when that happened, Chinese people were very upset.
Of course.
And at the time, the U.S. was going through its, I guess it was earlier because it was about 2007, 2008, when we had that meltdown, the financial meltdown in the U.S. These big projects, the banks were pulling back. They weren't willing to lend on these projects. And so now these Chinese were looking for a way to get to North America. And so they invested in these big projects. And so it was a win-win. I mean, a lot of these projects wouldn't have gotten built if it wasn't for the Chinese money coming in. And they got their green cards.
Interesting. It's cool to see how a government program can have so much impact on the business activity, so much impact on the people that are coming to a country, so much impact on just influencing people to get to a new place in general, right? Do you think it's a program that the government should look at introducing? Like, how do you think it impacts a country?
Canada? Yeah, sure. I mean, why not? Canada has a point system, right? And so the people that want to draw to this country are intelligent, are well-educated, are successful. And so why not have a program where if they make an investment in a business, it can translate into citizenship?
You know what? Well, if they do, I think I got a guy that could do some due diligence for them. So
keep an eye on it. Thanks for them.
Kurt, man, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was an honor.
Well, thank you.
To hear it in a little bit more depth, and I'm very excited to share this with the future generations. I think some of the things that you said about travel, leaving your hometown, being exposed to different ideals, different thoughts, different beliefs, different ways of living, is really, something that can impact and broaden someone's horizon. So really excited to see how this episode shapes people up, because personally, I had no clue that you could invest $800,000 and get a green card immediately, right? And on top of that, to even make a business out of it is super cool. So we appreciate you sharing, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Hi, my name is Kurt Royce, CEO of EB5 Marketplace, and thanks for watching my episode of 100 Ways to Make 100K.